Hi, I'm Mitchell Keenan and I'm studying Sports Business at the University of Canberra. For Assessment 2, the Sports Business podcast, I chose to do Women in Sport, and I chose the question, in Grand Slam tennis, events women play best of 3 sets while men play best of 5. This structural difference cannot be justified now that many tournament organisers offer similar prize money to women as they offer to men. Critically examine the case for and against. Is the debate over equal pay principally about time on the court? How significant also is the respective roles of male and female players as entertainers who attract crowds, sponsors and the media gaze at major tournaments? To first delve into this question, we must look at the history of tennis. Tennis is a sport with an incredibly rich and regal history that certainly does not differ in regards to crowd size, prize money and level of intensity when looking at equality and gender. There is, however, one notable difference when examining men's and women's competitive tennis, this being the amount of sets played, thus determining the length of matches as well. In modern tennis, and since women's tennis was first played, women have played best of 3 while men have played a best of 5 format. This format has been a cause of controversial debates ever since competitive tennis was conceived, and truly to understand why, we must first look back to England in 1873, when the first book of rules for tennis, formerly known as Færøstike, or lawn tennis, was published by Major Walter Colton Wingfield. The sport was slightly different at the time, being said to have been based off badminton, a popular sport at the time, and was played on an hourglass shape. As the sport took off, English lawn bowls clubs started to clear their greens in order to host lawn tennis matches. The most famous example of this is Wimbledon, the home of the most famous tennis tournament in the world. It was around the same time as this that Wellesley College, a school in the US, became the first to enforce mandatory physical education for girls. This may not have seemed like a huge decision at the time, but as it caught wind around the other schools and eventually carried overseas, this paved the way for women everywhere to get more involved and begin to eventually compete in competitions of all sorts. As women's sport wasn't openly accepted and being competed in at the time that Wimbledon was being conceived, it took a good 10 years before they were given their own competition. But from then on the sport has grown hugely for both men. The first women's format was a best of 3, and this was justified at the time, as the prize money was lower, the crowds were smaller and the physical condition of women at the time could not compare to the men, who had been doing tennis-specific training long before women. The same, however, cannot be said today, as women are paid the same amount, play in the same facilities with the same size crowds, and receive the same amount of media attention as the men. So why do women still only play a best of 3? It seems an outdated system. With such a push for equality, there are very few sports in fact that have a separate system for men and women, and I feel it's time for viewers' sake, as well as players, to prove that they can play and compete a full best of 5 match. Pay in women's tennis may have been debated ever since it was first played, but the first organised meeting to discuss the issue took place in 1951, as the International Labour Organization looked to find equality of payment for women. In search of footage of old tennis tournaments, I found some footage of the Bournemouth tournament in 1968. This was the first of its kind where men and women would be competing on the same stage and regarded as the same level.
Bournemouth, tennis history in the making. Professional met amateur in the first ever championships open to both categories of player. In action here, Peter Curtis versus the mighty Australian professional Fred Stolle. Stolle, seeded number 6, beat Curtis. But truly open tennis had come at last and was welcomed by Christine Truman and other players like Bobby Wilson. Stanley Matthews Jr. and the young set of up-and-coming tennis stars will be the ones to benefit from the new and very sensible policy of the British Lawn Tennis Association. It hasn't met with all-round approval, but there were plenty of top tennis names competing in the hard-court championships, like Virginia Wade, to prove the decision a right one. Angela Mortimer and tennis fashion designer Teddy Tinling gave their endorsement to the biggest shake-up tennis has had in years. So the Bournemouth Championships will go down in sporting history as the breakthrough tennis event where the players met the gentlemen and the ladies met each other. But the most important thing was not status, but the game.
It wasn't until 1973 that the first parity of pay was achieved at the US Open. The Australian Open had periods of equal pay throughout the 80s, but it wasn't until 2001 that they officially agreed on parity. Wimbledon were the last to follow, only achieving parity in 2007, but the tournament was known for having the highest women's pay rates throughout the late 1900s. The ILO, however, stands by the idiom equal pay for equal work, which does go against the debate of women being worthy of equal pay when they aren't putting in the same amount of time on the court. The ILO recently claimed that female tennis players don't play best out of 5 sets, so they shouldn't be paid the same as men, who do. I looked into what some of the professional players thought on the matter, and my findings were quite interesting. There were a number of male and female players that had no issue with equality in pay, but there are a few players, mostly males, that were unhappy with the current system as they believe that women did not attract the same amount of global interest, therefore they should not receive the same amount in winnings. French professional tennis player Gilles Simon shared his stance on the issue in 2012.
The male players spend twice as long in the court at Roland Garros as the women. The equality in salaries isn't something that works in sport. Men's tennis remains more attractive than women's tennis at the moment.
When in form, both men and women can produce some incredible tennis. The next 2 rallies I've included are some of the best I've seen in the game, and they both demonstrate that both men and women both deserve to be paid at an equal amount, but the only thing dividing that is the time spent on the court, and the wage equality really comes into play with that one.
Federer catches a break.
That's almost an outburst from Nadal, isn't it?
Good. Oh, come on! Phenomenal! No way! That's insane.
I don't think there's been a better point in the entire championship these 2 weeks. Every one of those shots was brilliant. And Federer comes back to erase a 4th break point in this game. How rich was that?
27-shot rally, and it all ended at the net. So it becomes a volley and a rally. Amazing stuff, and again, it's just that tentativeness from Justine that was lacking until that last game is still around in this one.
Not only the Williams clan, but this sellout crowd at
When considering a matchday schedule, the 3-set versus 5-set debate could actually have the potential to make a big difference financially in a number of categories. First off, the prolonged match time would extend the overall time of the tournament and its coverage, creating more opportunity for advertising. Longer matches also mean longer match days, creating the possibility of adding another day or session to the tournament and adding the potential of revenue that could be brought in during the tournament. Of the many tennis tournaments existing around the world, there have only been a couple of competitions that have trialled having women play best of 5 format. The first was at the 1901 US National Championships, and then the second was at the Women's Tennis Association Championship Finals, enforcing the format change from 1984 to 1998. It is not particularly clear why these specific events chose to introduce the same format as the men, but the matches that were produced during the change were both entertaining and rewarding for those who were participating as well as those who were
Further back the 5-set format in women's tennis, one of the most exciting games in history happened in the 1996 WTA Championship Final in a 5-set thriller between Steffi Graf and Martina Hingis, Steffi Graf coming out with a win in the end.
Whilst we can point out the obvious fact that men are overall better athletically, generally having longer reach, a higher vertical leap, and more muscle fibres, stamina is the most important factor when playing a 5-set match. As professional athletes, I personally feel that a female tennis player should be fit enough to compete in a best-of-5 format that provides a true demonstration of skill and resilience, whilst also providing a testament to work put in towards training and finding peak physical form. As far as revenue is concerned in terms of women's tennis as a spectacle, adding the extra match time could only be positive. It would increase the program length, which in turn would allow the possibility of higher ticket prices, and it would extend television coverage, creating opportunity for more advertisements. Personally, I feel that the perks of bumping women up to the best-of-5 format by far outweigh any arguments against the change. And although it may take time for the players to adapt to that, and the quality may temporarily drop off, the overall outcome will be highly beneficial for tennis in the not too distant future.